I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. 21 days from right now, something unique is going to happen at the Oregon State Hospital, which holds roughly 800 patients who are getting mental health treatment. 21 days from now, 23 patients will be released. Now, patients are released from the hospital there all the time when they're finished with their treatment. That number, by the way, averages about 67 people a month. But even more than that need to get in each month. So what's unique about these 23 patients? They're the first group that will be kicked out because of a federal court order to make room for new patients who need to get in. And that definitely makes this our big story. Mental health is a huge issue in Oregon and Southwest Washington. You email and call us about it all the time, and we love it. Keep them coming. It's an even bigger thing, though, when we start talking about people who have mental health challenges and who have committed crimes. And that's why this group of 23 is so unique. They have been charged with crimes, 11 with felonies, 12 with misdemeanors. But they were found unable to help in their own defense because of their mental health. That's called aid and assist. Over the past few years, there's been such a surge of aid and assist people sent to the state hospital that the place really is just jammed. And now there are other people, aid and assist actually, waiting to get in there. And they're sitting in jails waiting to get into the hospital that's already full. Not enough people are leaving, so the wait time is getting longer and longer and longer. This chart from the Oregon Health Authority shows the numbers. That black line, that represents the number of days a patient in jail has to wait to get into the state hospital. A court has ordered that it should be 7 days or less. But when the chart was made in July, there on the right, that's closer to 40 days. Here's a look at the overall state hospital numbers. Remember, we're talking only about the state mental hospital. On the far left is January 2000. On the far right is January 2022. The black line on the top shows the total population of patients at the hospital. Sometimes it's been as high as 800 people. Earlier this year, it was closer to 700. The blue line there shows the number of people who are there for aid and assist. There were less than 100 way back in 2000. Now it's more like 400. And look at the gray line there. Those are the people sent to the hospital on civil commitments. They have not been charged with a crime. They've not committed a crime. They just need psychiatric help in a secure setting. That used to be nearly 400 people. That's the line there on the left. Now it's almost zero. State leaders, including Oregon Health Authority Director Patrick Allen, have definitely noticed.
And those numbers have changed drastically, particularly driven by the aid and assist population increasing to about 400 patients. And the result of all of that change has really been to crowd out civil patients. There are just a handful now of civilly committed patients who are in the hospital, which you all working with behavioral health issues in your communities know.
So yes, even those of us not working with behavioral health issues, those of us driving around our communities have seen it. That's one big reason why so many folks with mental health issues seem to be on the streets in Portland and elsewhere. Earlier this month, I found out about this video conference that focused on the state hospital and the new rules. They called it a virtual town hall. It was, I think, kind of intended for insiders, but it was actually public, so I jumped in. I listened as a leader for Metro Public Defenders, Jesse Merrithew, talked about why they asked a federal judge to order the state hospital to begin releasing aid and assist patients.
We're facing a sort of intractable problem in having more people going into the hospital than were coming out. And we, representing the plaintiffs, believe that something needed to be done about that, because the effect was that not only are they not now complying with the underlying Mink injunction, but there wasn't any hope of compliance in the near term.
So that Mink injunction gives us a clue. This fight has been going on for 20 years, it turns out. Way back in 2002, folks like Disability Rights Oregon sued the state over this very exact same problem. It was taking way too long for people with mental health issues who were facing criminal charges to get into the hospital, and instead they had to wait in jail cells, which is not great. The court agreed. The state appealed, and they lost. Disability Rights Oregon tells me the state was doing great at managing the population at the hospital from the time they lost the case until just before COVID, and that it's been kind of a problem ever since COVID, though. Okay, back to the video conference. There were hundreds of people from all over Oregon tuned in because this is a big deal. Those 23 folks who are going to be released, they are just the first batch. OHA has estimated publicly that the total will be more like 100 released, but when I added the numbers shown on one of the charts in their presentations, it's over 200. So the number must be, let's just say, fluid. Groups will be released each month all the way through December of 2023, which had some people on the call, like Deanne Carr from Deschutes County, asking a tough question, and Patrick Allen giving his answer.
To really get down to brass tacks, is the Oregon State Hospital going to discharge individuals to the street?
I think the most straightforward thing I can say is that we intend to comply with Judge Mossman's order to the court of jurisdiction at the time that the time limit expires.
So that's not exactly a clear yes on whether patients will be discharged to the streets, but it's certainly not a no. Here's the new timeline for aid and assist patients issued by the federal judge. Those charged with a misdemeanor will only be treated now for 90 days and then released. Non-Measure 11 felonies, so those are not violent, they can be treated for up to 6 months. People charged with violent felonies under Measure 11 will be treated for only a year. Now, that timeline had many on the video call really concerned. Where are those people going to go when they're released? Where will they be released to? One of those who is concerned is Judge Nan Waller. She spent the last 30 years trying to make the intersection of mental health and criminal justice a better experience for all sides. She's also the presiding judge in Multnomah County. Here's part of what she had to say at that conference.
And I've talked to, Care Oregon, I've talked to you, I've talked to the counties that we will be in the same position. This is not a crowd. The justice-involved population with behavioral health issues is not a crowd that a lot of people are jumping up and down and saying, we will take them. And I worry that we will be in the same position, except that people are going to end up on the streets, which I think under some circumstances, that may be the only option that is available, and it may not be something that creates difficulties. But in some circumstances, it will. And I think that just like the justice system has a responsibility to community safety, I know that you agree that so does the behavioral health system.
So that is a lot, but we wanted to give you a deep dive into what's happening at the state hospital. It affects your local jail and people who have serious mental health issues and are charged with crimes. It also affects those who have big mental health issues but have not been charged with a crime. And I think really one way or another, it likely touches each of us. We have a lot more on this. In fact, it was too much to put into this story tonight. Tomorrow night, we're going to hear from the Washington County District Attorney, Kevin Barton, who's very concerned about this upcoming release. And on the other side, we'll talk with Emily Cooper, the legal director for Disability Rights Oregon. She has some pretty strong arguments about why the releases from the state hospital make sense for everyone. So you're going to want to tune in tomorrow. In the meantime, if you want to share your opinions, let them fly. Our email is thestory@kgw.com. You can also call and leave a voicemail. Our number is 503-226-5090. Now, let's talk about addiction. It's no secret it's a huge problem in our community, especially for the homeless population. But what happens when someone wakes up one morning and decides, let's get clean and sober? Blair Best found that walk-in resources in Portland are extremely limited, regardless if you're homeless or not.
We hear from homeless people nearly every day who tell us they're addicted to drugs and alcohol. That's one of the reasons they're stuck out on the streets. So we checked in to see if there are places people can go to get immediate help. We found there are only 2 large-scale walk-in detox centers in the city, and they can't keep up with the demand and end up turning people away. It's a pattern on the streets.
I'm an addict, and my family doesn't condone it.
Drug use, honestly.
Drug use, a common coping mechanism for many who are homeless.
It was just something to do because I was bored.
And turns out getting clean in Portland isn't easy, regardless of if you're homeless or not. Take it from Erica Shear, who has a house, a full-time job, and struggles with addiction.
Drinking became much more of a crutch.
She started drinking when she was 12.
Yeah, there's that.
She's now 46 and wants to quit. She tried on her own last month, but ended up in the hospital.
my tongue. I still have to hold it in. I almost bit off half of my tongue. I had 3 grand mal seizures in one day because I quit alcohol.
Now she's looking for professional help and was dropped off outside Fora Health Tuesday morning in Southeast, one of the 2 large-scale detox treatment centers in the city that accepts walk-ins.
I tried to go yesterday to another one. I wasn't able to be seen. And then tried again today, wasn't able to be seen.
She was one of about 20 people in line. She says they only had space for 3.
Horrible. Like, I just actually walked out of the rehabilitation center after waiting and just said, I just need help. And to not be able to get that, yeah, very deflating.
It takes enough courage just to show up to these places, and then when the help isn't there, yeah, it's definitely disappointing.
Jimmy Sanchez was also turned away. He's been trying to get into detox now for 2 days.
Oh, they just took my information and then called all the names of who they were accepting, and then whoever they didn't call, they didn't have a bed for today.
Well, it's awful. It's awful.
Jessica Gregg is Fora Health's chief medical officer.
One of the earliest moments of distress of the day is when there's a long line and there are 6 open beds.
Starting at 7:30 in the morning, 6 days a week, people ready to detox line up outside these doors. Fora just increased their number of beds from 16 to 24, but it's still not nearly enough. They also need more staff.
Even just talking about it, I'm almost choking up because it doesn't get easier.
Jennifer Hartley works with the walk-in patients. The majority are addicted to fentanyl or alcohol, and nearly half of them are homeless.
We see people for whom this is their very first time seeking any kind of treatment.
She prioritizes those who keep showing up, even if there aren't available beds. But it doesn't make turning them away any easier.
We work to admit anywhere from 11 to 14 people a day, sometimes more, and we turn away about the same amount.
Amanda Risser works at Hooper Detox Center in North Portland, the only other large-scale treatment center offering walk-in detox services like Fora's. There they have 55 beds and help 2,500 people a year. That's about 260 people a month.
And every month we are unable to serve about the same amount of people due to space considerations. We just simply don't have enough beds.
I think, nationwide, we're looking at ways to expand access to treatment, and I think it can't possibly happen fast enough.
But for those struggling with addiction, time is of the essence.
I just couldn't go on anymore. I was dying.
Over a year ago, Kate Platty slept in her car across the street from DePaul Treatment Center, which is now Fora Health.
I was addicted to meth and benzos, and I just couldn't go on anymore. And I hit my knees and cried out to God and said, God, if you're real, can you please just get me sober or take me to heaven in my sleep tonight, because I can't go on another day like this.
At 18, she left the foster care system and her life spiraled out of control.
I met a guy who it didn't feel like homelessness. It just felt like we'd party every night and stay at a different person's house. And then in between, we'd stay in our car. And I had never been homeless before, so it felt like an adventure. And eventually, it wasn't fun anymore. But at that point, I was trapped.
Locked in a lifestyle that eventually changed when a rehab bed opened up.
And then it was glorious. I slept for 5 days. The food was great. The nurses were so nice. I was just so happy to be here and to feel like I was safe. It wasn't survival anymore.
But for people like Erica, she's left waiting.
Tomorrow, hopefully we can be seen.
And yearning for the day she can be set free.
To not have to pick up a bottle, to not spend my time going to the liquor store in the morning because I have the shakes, to not go to a bar at 7 a.m. because I have the shakes.
Both of these detox centers say they're almost always able to get people in if they come 2 or 3 days in a row. And a typical stay is 3 to 5 days. After that, they connect patients with case managers to help keep them on the road to recovery. Their goal is to never discharge people back into homelessness. But given the challenges they face, that's not always possible. Blair Best, KGW News.
Blair joins us now, and what a powerful story that was. We should also point out there are other detox centers, but none exactly like this, where it's large and open and anybody can show up any day.
Right.
What did you find that needs to happen out there?
Yeah, so bottom line, Pat, both of these detox centers say it really comes down to physical space. They need more beds. But beyond that, there needs to be more of these detox centers scattered throughout the city, because the one in Southeast is pretty difficult to get to on foot, and the one in North Portland doesn't have any parking. So those who live in their cars, they often don't show up because there's no safe place to store their things in their car. And that's not even to mention the people that go through the legwork, find the place to store their car, their tent, their other belongings. They show up only to be turned away.
Ugh. And they need to store their car because if they get in, they'll be in there for 3 to 5 days. They don't want tickets, they don't want it towed, that sort of thing. Tell us a little bit about the process and how you found these fascinating people.
Yeah, so this all started between a conversation between a colleague and I, and she was talking to me about some of the recent homeless stories I've done. You know, a lot of people out there say they're struggling with addiction, and that's one of the reasons that they don't go into shelter. And some of these people off camera have come up to me and say they want to get help, they just don't know how. So in an effort to have answers for these people when I'm out in the field, I looked into it, and I wanted to know if there was any place that these people could go to get immediate help. And this is what we found. So after talking with both of these treatment centers and that 26-year-old who made it through the center, I felt like there was still a hole in our story. I felt like there were voices that I needed to hear from. And that's those that show up every morning trying to get into a detox center and trying to get a bed and just get turned away. So we woke up at 5:30 on Tuesday, 5:30 in the morning, and we went to one of these centers and we set up across the street and we waited. And starting at 7, we saw cars pulling into the parking lot, and about 20 minutes later, many of those cars started pulling right back out. And I saw this one couple, they had been dropped off, and they were walking out of the parking lot and they just looked physically distraught and frustrated. And I went up to them and they told me that this was the second day in a row that they'd been turned away. And you know, I'm waiting to see if they actually got a bed. They said they were going to go back this morning, actually, and I haven't heard back.
Which maybe is hopeful. Maybe they're in the treatment right now, and that's why they can't call you.
Hopefully.
Yeah, great insights and showing us that. We really appreciate it, Blair.
Thanks, Pat.
Well done.
Still to come on The Story. The Oregon governor's race is heating up, now considered a toss-up, and the money is pouring into all 3 campaigns. But where are the biggest contributions coming from? You asked us, we've got answers when The Story returns.
Well, the pages are turning on the calendar. We're just 48 days now from the election. The political ads are really ramping up. I'm sure you've noticed. Oregon's governor's race is getting national attention as some political experts say the race is now a toss-up between Democrat Tina Kotek, Republican Christine Drazan, and unaffiliated candidate Betsy Johnson. It's fascinating if you love politics like I do. Is the long run of Democratic governors coming to an end in Oregon, or can Tina Kotek continue Oregon's blue precedent? Will Christine Drazan flip the Republican script? The last Republican to hold office was Vic Atiyeh, and he was replaced by Democrat Neil Goldschmidt way back in 1987. Or will Betsy Johnson make history? According to the National Governors Association, Oregon has only had one unaffiliated or independent governor, and that was Jules Meyer back in 1930 or in the 30s. There's a lot at stake. And after our segment on the race earlier this week, a lot of you had questions. In fact, some, like Steve, asked, "Hello, Pat and crew. Who are the top donors of each of the gubernatorial candidates?" Well, that's a great question, Steve. So we went and found the answer. One of our digital reporters, Anthony Masuk, tracked down the data. It's all publicly available on something called the Oregon Secretary of State's Overstar Campaign Finance Database. Don't try to remember that. Candidates are required to log all their campaign contributions and expenditures, but they don't have to do it immediately. So some of the transactions from this week are not listed yet, but here's what Anthony found so far. It is a very expensive race, and it's poised to likely become the most expensive in Oregon history. Each of the candidates has raised between $8 and $9 million. Combined, it totals more than $26 million. But they've spent nearly $24 million so far, so they're spending it almost as fast as they're getting it. And they're spending it on things like these campaign ads that you see almost all the time in the commercial breaks. But where do things stand right now? Well, we're 7 weeks away from Election Day, and all three candidates are in the same ballpark when it comes to cash on hand. Johnson has about $2.6 million, Kotek $2.5 million, Drazan around $2 million. A majority of the donations to each campaign are $1,000 or less, mostly coming from individual Oregonians. The small donations make up less than $1 million for each candidate, though, meaning there are some pretty big players pouring money into the race. Now to Steve's question, and the question on many of your minds. Where is the majority of this money coming from? Let's take a dive here. We start with Democrat Tina Kotek. Her biggest donor is the fundraising arm of the Democratic Party. That's called the Democratic Governors Association. They've given over $3.1 million. The rest of her top-end donors include political action committees and labor groups, $565,000 from the Citizen Action for Political Education PAC, $340,000 from the Stand for Children Oregon, and $250,000 from the Oregon League of Conservation Voters. Now, Republican Christine Drazan. Her biggest donor is the fundraising arm of the Republican Party. That's also called the Republican Governors Association. See a trend here? They've kicked in over $2.6 million. Her other big donors lean more toward businesses, including $500,000 from the lumber company Swanson Group, $350,000 from Murphy Plywood, $250,000 over the past year from the Stephen J. Harder Trust, and the same amount from Blue Water Farm and K&E Excavating. And finally, let's look at Betsy Johnson. As an unaffiliated candidate, she doesn't have those big party donors, but she does have some big names and big corporations on her side, including one you may have heard of, Phil Knight. He's the Nike co-founder and her biggest donor by far, totaling $1.5 million. Next is the Eugene-based heavy equipment company, the Pepe Group, giving $750,000 over the past year. Columbia Sportswear CEO Tim Boyle has given $400,000 over the past year. And Betsy Johnson has an array of large donations of $100,000 or more from logging and timber companies, which you'd kind of expect with her family's lumber background. Now, this is just a snapshot of the fundraising efforts as they appear right now. You can bet your bottom dollar that fundraising and spending will only ramp up as we get closer to the November 8th election, with millions being tossed around for a single purpose: your vote. You can find our full story on these campaign donations right now on KGW.com. Still to come on the story. There's a great organization working to help foster kids in the Salem area. We want you to know about it. They use a variety of programs to help kids and their foster families feel supported to be the best they can be. And we're hearing from the group's president on how you can help right after the break. This week for our Hey Help campaign, we're highlighting Salem's Angels. They help empower children and families in the foster care system by providing community support with several programs like Love Box. Volunteers create personalized care packages each month to meet the needs of children and parents in the foster care system. They also provide support and create community. They do that with snacks, activities, or books for kids, or gift cards or household supplies for parents.
It is so important because of what they experience, what they have experienced at no fault of their own, and the trauma they've experienced. They need to feel some normalcy, and we're able to provide that for them with helping them be part of an extracurricular something, to be the one person sitting there that has no agenda. They have so many meetings, the families and the youth. There's so many meetings that they have to be a part of. And bless all case management staff, you know, all the things their hearts, like they wouldn't be in that line of work if they didn't love these kids. But the kids are like, we know you have an agenda. And yet another meeting, we don't have an agenda. They're our agenda. Like, what do you want to focus on? What can I help with you today? I want to hear you. I want to see you. I want to look in your eyes. And I am here for you.
That sounds like a great program. If you'd like to donate to Salem Angels or learn how to volunteer to create love boxes, open up the camera function on your phone right now and hover it over the QR code there on your screen. It will allow you to donate to them directly. We'll finish up the show coming up right after this. Hey, that's our show. Thanks for being with us tonight. And remember, the story, our story,